So you didn't do so well on the test. This is round 2. And this time, it's personal. This is our time. It didn't go great the first time. That's okay. Don't get mad. Get glad. Get ready to fill out this sheet. You fill all the sheets out, you fill all the blanks, and then you do your note cards to go with it. Study the worksheet, study the note cards, and then kick a little booty on round 2. Let's go. Now you take out that piece of paper, the one that has all the blanks, so you pay attention to the numbers. Over here in the top left corner of our screen, we're going to have the numbers that we're on. You follow along with the red text. Whatever is in red is what you want to be writing down. I will try to go slowly, but pay attention to what I'm saying, because this is the information you need to learn. Alright, so check this out. Last test, we talked about how Great Britain was taxing the colonists. The colonists hated this, so they started protests that led to war, which led to the end of the war and the United States of America. But the colonists viewed Great Britain as being a strong, powerful government. So when they get their chance to have their own government, they want to have a super weak government. So that's what they get in the form of the Articles of Confederation. Check this out. You guys see right up here, look at number 1, number 1, number 1, number 1, number 1. Let's go! American leaders were fearful of a, write this word in here, powerful central government in the form of Great Britain. They did not want a government to be as strong as Great Britain was. So they came up with a weak national government in the form of the Articles of Confederation. If you learn nothing else about the Articles of Confederation, always know that they were super duper weak. See, the national government wasn't strong. Who actually got that power were the states. Number 2, the Articles of Confederation gave power to the states, not to the national government. So, let me now explain, or as you kids like to say, splain, the weakness of the Articles of Confederation. Well, if we have 3 branches of government today, the Articles of Confederation had 1 branch. They had a legislative branch. They had a Congress. Did they have a president? No. Did they have a judicial branch, a Supreme Court? No. There was no executive or no judicial branch for the Articles of Confederation government. Now let's talk about that legislative branch. They had a Congress. Each state got 1 vote. It didn't matter how big or how small you were. The Articles of Confederation gave each state 1 vote in Congress, right in 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, regardless of its size. So if you were really big states, and the big states back then were New York, were Virginia, or in the small states were Delaware, New Jersey, it doesn't matter. You're a state, you all get the same. So the small states love it, the big states don't. What about taxation? The Articles of Confederation gave Congress no power to tax. Now that makes sense because the American Revolution was a war that was largely started over taxation. So it makes sense they will have no power to tax whatsoever. What about business between states? Who has the power to regulate business between states? That would be not the Articles of Confederation. They had no power to regulate commerce. Now commerce is just a fancy word for business among the states. Question, trivia time. What color was the Articles of Confederation money? If our money is green, what was theirs? It was no color. The Articles of Confederation provided for no common currency. They could not coin money. They weren't printing any bills. They were weak. They were so weak that this new United States of America was failing at the beginning. So a bunch of folks got together to try to revise the Articles of Confederation, and quickly they realized we need to throw out the Articles of Confederation and write ourselves a new government, and that new government was the Constitutional Convention under the form of the Constitution. So we gotta have plans, right? First big plan was our plan from our home state, Virginia! The Virginia plan had 3 branches, a legislative branch, an executive branch, and a judicial branch. So we will have a president, we will have a Supreme Court. Just like the government that we have today, that was the Virginia plan. See, that makes sense. Write this word in. It was the foundation for the structure of the new government. The foundation, because they have 3 branches then, we have 3 branches now. Makes sense, right? Not everyone loved the Virginia plan. Big states liked it, but small states didn't. Small states favor the New Jersey plan, which gave more power, more voting power in the legislative branch to smaller states. So we got a big fight. And the fight is between big states and small states. We need a compromise to fix this. But we don't need any compromise. We need a great compromise. The Great Compromise settled disputes between large states and small states. Each one wanted some power. The Great Compromise gave each one some power. The issue was over representation in the legislative branch, in Congress. Who gets voting power? Big states or small states? So the Great Compromise says both do. Check this out. You ready for this? Watch this. Here we go. Here we go. Here we go. Woo! The Senate gave equal representation. So if you are any state, you get the same number of senators, which is 2. So in that way, small states get power, right? They have the same amount of power as big states because everybody gets 2. But in the House of Representatives, it's based off population. The more people you have, the more power you get. And that means big states like New York, like Virginia, are happy because they get to have lots of voting power because they got lots of people. Let's talk about a sad thing about representation in the legislature. You want to count as many people as possible as people to get more power. So the southern states wanted to count their slaves. The northern states said, no way, you don't get to count your slaves. You don't treat them as real people. Why should they get voting power? Or you should get power to represent them in the votes for the legislative branch. So the compromise was the 3/5 compromise, which counted slave as 3/5 of a person. So for every 5 slaves, you get to count 3 of them, or for every 1 slave, 3/5 of their body counts. Super weird, super crazy, and super sad. When you're dealing with slavery, weird stuff like this happens. When determining representation, now write this in the House of Representatives. So the 3/5 compromise had nothing to do with the Senate. It had everything to do with the House of Representatives. All right, couple of basic stuff about our new government. We got 3 branches, and they can kind of bounce off of each other because we have numerous checks and balances in order for one branch not to become too powerful. Okay, we got checks and balances. Hey, here's the other thing. This national government, or federal government, that's the supreme law of the land. The Constitution made federal law supreme over state. The Articles of Confederation did not have that. Remember, the states had the power. Now the Constitution, the supreme law of the land, is the federal government. But do the states, do they have any power? Of course they do. Otherwise, gave the states considerable leeway to govern themselves. So we still have everything that in the Constitution is left out. Those powers are going to the states. Going to the states! So how do we get this Constitution? There must have been some individuals that played very important roles. They did. Key leaders of the Constitution. Who was the president of the Constitution? Well, it's the same guy who was the leader of the Continental Army. That would be George Washington. George Washington was president of the convention. Now, you might think that means he talked a lot, but he didn't talk much at all. Some say that he spoke less than 10 words in the Constitutional Convention. He seldom, write that in, seldom participated, but it mattered because he lent his enormous prestige. I believe I'm blocking the word prestige. It is P-R-E-S-T-I-G-E, prestige. It means the credit you get for being awesome. George Washington was awesome in the eyes of his countrymen. So the fact that he was even there gave it validity, gave it credibility, gave it meaning. Meaning it wouldn't have had if he wasn't there. He was president, didn't talk a lot, but it mattered that he was there. James Madison was the brains of the Constitution. That's why he's called the father of the Constitution. Remember that Virginia plan? 3 separate branches, the foundation of our government today. He authored the Virginia plan, James Madison did. Now, we know what happened at the Constitution because he was writing a bunch of notes he took. He kept copious, write that in, copious, which means a lot of, he kept a lot of notes of the proceedings of the Constitutional Convention. And he later authored the Bill of Rights, which are added onto the Constitution. So in that way, he is the ultimate Constitution dude, which is why he's known as the father of the Constitution. Now here's the thing. You don't just get to write the Constitution to be done with it. you've got to ratify the Constitution. You have to have enough states that will vote on the Constitution to make it legitimate. So you get groups that are forming. Now, one group were the Federalists. The Federalists were in favor of ratification of the Constitution. They were excited about what the Constitution would bring to them in terms of power. They believed in a strong, write that in, a strong central government to promote economic development. The Articles of Confederation were extremely weak. We need something much more strong. That's what the Federalists believed. Hey, look, we're on 14. We're still on 14. New slide, same number. Today, if you see the role of the federal government in solving national problems, so if you have big problems, you need big government to solve them, and that way you are heirs to the tradition. You have inherited the ideas of the Federalists. Now that's one side. You ready for another side? You ready for another side? Here comes the other side, the Oh, I'm sorry, real quick. Who were the big Virginia Federalists, the big proponents, meaning we want ratification? George Washington, of course, because he was the president of the Constitutional Convention, and James Madison, of course, because he was the father of the Constitution. So it just makes sense that they would want to have the Constitution get ratified. All right, what's that other group? What's that other group? Anti-Federalists, baby. Anti-Federalists were against ratification of the Constitution. Just like right after the American Revolution, Anti-Federalists were fearful of an overly powerful central government. They feared that the government would destroy the rights of individuals and the prerogatives of the states. The states would not be able to do what they wanted to do. So today, if you're not such a big fan of big government, if you think big government gets in the way and takes away individual rights, you're kind of like an anti-federalist just in 2015, 16, 17. Today, more conservative thinkers echo these concerns and champion liberty and individual initiative and free markets. So we got to fight. We got to fight. The Anti-Federalists would not ratify the Constitution if they did not get a couple of guarantees added to the Constitution which protected individual rights. And those guarantees would be the Bill of Rights. But first, who were the big Anti-Federalists? Number 17. Virginia opponents of ratification were Patrick Henry and George Mason. They were against the ratification of the Constitution. All right, Bill of Rights I just talked about. Now, the author of the Bill of Rights, spoiler alert, was James Madison. But James Madison, much like Thomas Jefferson, did not write the Declaration of Independence all himself. He did not write the Bill of Rights all himself. He borrowed those ideas. One person who he borrowed the ideas from was this guy, George Mason. George Mason, who wrote the Virginia Declaration of Rights. Virginia Declaration of Rights, write in rights, and then write the name George Mason, reiterated the idea that basic human rights should not be violated. So, talking about freedom of speech, freedom to petition, freedom of assembly, the right to keep and bear arms. These ideas come from the Virginia Declaration of Rights. But nothing in there about religion. The religious ideas come from Thomas Jefferson. The Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom was written by Thomas Jefferson. And what did it do? It outlawed government support for one favored, write this in, church. The blank that you have to write is church. At that time, or before the American Revolution, everybody had to pay taxes to the Church of England. There was one favored government church. Thomas Jefferson said, that's crazy. There should not be one favored government church, and it outlawed that with the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom. Who borrowed these ideas? James Madison borrowed these ideas. The father of the Constitution is James Madison. Remember that. Guy who kept those copious notes. He wrote the Bill of Rights. He consulted the Virginia Declaration of Rights and the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom when drafting the Bill of Rights. How many amendments does the Bill of Rights have? Number 10. The first 10 amendments of the Constitution are the Bill of Rights. Made everybody all happy and led to the ratification of the Constitution. So now we have a new government. Throw out the Articles of Confederation, add the Constitution, and now we have new fighting that's taking place between different groups. And these different groups I speak of are political parties. Now, one name you're familiar with, don't think they're exactly the same, is the Federalists. The Federalist Party supported a strong national government and an industrial economy. They had leaders. They were led by the guy who wanted the Bank of the United States, that's Alexander Hamilton. And then they would be led by the second president of the United States, John Adams. The first president of the United States is George Washington. He was a Federalist. The second president of the United States was John Adams. He was a Federalist. So we have the Federalist Party. The other party were the Democratic Republicans. They favored a weak national government and an agricultural economy. Not this big commerce industrial economy. They favored an agricultural economy. They were led by Thomas Jefferson and James Madison. So at first, the presidents come from the Federalist Party, but you still have the Democratic Republican Party that is out there. And then comes the election of 1800 for the third president. And the third president becomes Thomas Jefferson. The election of 1800 was won by Jefferson. Now here's the crazy thing about this. You got Federalists, and then you get Democratic Republicans, which means there's a change of power. Throughout world history, when there are changes of power in government, there is blood. You know how much blood spilled on the streets of Washington? No blood. The first peaceful transfer of power in American history happens with the election of 1800. Alright, let's talk about a court case real quick. You know, right when Adams was leaving, he wanted to appoint his own judges, and Thomas Jefferson didn't want that, so he fired the judge. And then the case went to Marbury versus Madison. It went to a guy named John Marshall, who was in charge of the Supreme Court. He was the Chief Justice. And everybody wanted to know, what was John Marshall going to do? Was he going to side with Jefferson? Was he going to side with the judge? He sided with his own court. Marbury versus Madison established the idea of judicial review. Judicial review states that federal courts can declare laws unconstitutional, that the Supreme Court can rip up laws made by Congress that do not make sense, that do not line up with the Constitution. The foundation for the Supreme Court to mediate between branches of government comes from Marbury versus Madison. So remember, Marbury versus Madison, judicial review. Declares laws unconstitutional. Now you remember it? Look at the word Marbury right here. You see these R's right here? I got an R here. I got an R here. All those R's come from review. Judicial review. Marbury versus Madison. Hey, real quick. I told you John Marshall was in charge of things. John Marshall's rulings established the judicial branch as an independent, co-equal branch of government. Hey, this is an easy one. United States expansion. You ready for this? Super easy one. We get bigger. We doubled our size with the purchase of the Louisiana Territory from France. In 1803, the Louisiana Purchase doubled the size of the United States. Boom! The territory was explored by Lewis and Clark with the aid of a Native American guide, Sacagawea. So you got exploration of this land. The Louisiana Purchase territory is being explored. Alright, last thing, last topic. Let's talk about the War of 1812. You know, the United States has already beaten Great Britain one time. Why not beat him again? Why go to war with them? Two causes. Here we go. The War of 1812 was caused by British, write this in, right, interference. Interference with American shipping. As American ships would try to do business in Europe, they'd be taken over by the British Navy. That's called impressment. That's one reason America wants to go to war. The other reason is interference with Western expansion. The Great Britain was arming Native Americans at a place called the Battle of Tippecanoe to try to prevent the United States from expanding further west. So we got two big causes, interference with shipping and Western expansion. Now, who wins this war? Well, the United States of America wins this war. Why? Because we're America. And when it's over, there's some land expansion. American victory led to an American claim to the Oregon Territory. The United States spreads all the way to the northwest, claiming land, at the same time as moving all the way down to the southeast. There's increased migration to Florida after the War of 1812. You know who the president was during the War of 1812? It was James Madison. He took over after Thomas Jefferson. He was a Democratic Republican. It was his war. So if you were not a Democratic Republican, if you were a Federalist, you hated the war. The Federalists did not like the War of 1812. One problem, America won. So if it looks like you're against America winning, it ain't look good. Federalist Party opposed President Madison's war resolution. They were against it. They came up with ideas of constitutional amendments, talked about leaving the Union. And as a result, the Federalist Party disappeared and were replaced by new political parties, the Whigs and the Know-Nothings. And my friend, that is a wrap. I want you to study this sheet, do those note cards, study those note cards, and be ready to do much better on round 2. Because this time, yeah, it's personal.